Stories affirm who we are. They help us understand the relations within ourselves and others. Whether these perceptions are real or imagined, the effect tends to be the same. We can understand our relation with others and we can align our behavior to that learning experience that we get through other people's experience by using storytelling. Storytelling is a key communications tool and is a very effective, cost effective, and it can really change behavior, especially in the public health sector. My name is Paula Alvarado. I'm Head of Global Communications for Uppsala Monitoring Center, and I hope you find this presentation useful. Today, in this presentation, we will explore the art of storytelling and discuss how good stories have the power to transform our perception of the world and impact our behavior, which is really key, crucial, I would say, for any communications related to health issues. When we work on health communications, we're always trying to affect our behavior and have a positive impact in people's life and attitudes towards medicines in this particular case. Shasa is from Quetta, Baluchistan province in Pakistan. She became paralyzed by polio at the age of 3. Her mother says that she never was vaccinated, which is why she's living with this incurable disability. When she was little, her father used to take her to school, and when her father passed away, her brothers took her there until she was admitted to college. She says her life was a real struggle because she wanted to pursue her studies, which she did. But when her brothers started working, it was really difficult to find somebody who could actually take her to school. Her mother took her to Lahore and stayed with her in a hostel until she received her master in fine arts. Shazia, you see, is an excellent painter. And she's also a very strong advocate for polio campaigns in Pakistan. Now, Chazia's mother has grown old, and she told me that she feels helpless because she cannot help her mom around the house. She cannot help her mom with the house chores, and she can't really look after her properly when her mom is sick. But she hasn't given up. As an artist, Shazia wants to fight polio through her paintings. That's what she does. She campaigns, she advocates. And she's been awarded the Medal of Excellence by the government of Pakistan for her job in eradicating polio. Chelsea's story is one of the millions of stories that we have around the world, telling how people have made efforts to change a situation, to overcome a challenge. And those are the kind of stories that we, in our work as communicators, find inspiring, but also share to inspire others to take action. There is no magic here, really, only the magic of the words and the magic of the stories and of their characters. Because stories are in our DNA. People are wired to understand stories. There are painting on caves. Stories were used to share experience, share knowledge from our ancestors. And we, as communicators, have just picked up on that lead and use them. We have picked up on the lead of the stories that we have all heard at home, told by our grandparents, told by our parents at the dinner table, or when we were going through any kind of problem or situations. These are the same stories that are shared along. In health communications, we can also use stories to change behavior. So, why and what do stories do? Stories are how we think. They help us give a meaning to life. They help us explain, persuade, understand, and teach things like social values and behaviors. So it's a very natural way of sharing experience. The stories affect our behavior. And more importantly, they motivate change. They're easy to remember and they're easy to share. Now you might be wondering why. Why does it work? Let's think for a minute. How do you remember things? How do you remember when you were younger, or even nowadays, because we're always learning? How do we share experience with other people? We always go back to anecdotes, to stories to prove our point. We don't normally refer to statistics and data to persuade our friends to change a behavior or our children to behave better, right? We share stories when we tell our kids why they should do this or that. We're telling stories to trying to affect their behavior, to have an impact. It's the same when we're talking to patients or other colleagues in the field. Stories basically help us synchronize your brain with my brain. When I was telling you about Chasia, and this is probably not the easiest presentation to do like this, recorded, because if I were there with you, I could have recreated the mood much better than like this with a recording, but it is what it is. And but I hope that when I was telling you the story of Chasia, we could still connect. You could imagine, by looking at her picture and listening to me telling you her story, you could imagine a little bit what her life was about. Where does Chasia live? What Pakistan looks like? Maybe most of you know because you're in the region, or not. But it's one of those ways of synchronizing our brains. It helps us connect. We connect. You and I are sharing an emotion. There's a lot of research that shows how our brains light up when we listen to a story more than factual reporting. It helps us remember. You might not remember Chasia's name, but you probably remember that there is a woman in Pakistan who suffers from polio, who lives with a disability and is a fantastic painter and is an advocate for polio eradication. We start with a story and we get people's attentions. We don't start with facts and data. We start with stories to get your attention, to get you to be keen to listen. Again, there's a lot of research that shows how stories change the brain chemistry, and this is because they're connected to our emotions. When we have an emotion, our brain chemistry changes, and we remember things because of what we were feeling when we were doing things, or when we were listening to things, okay? And they affect our behavior. That's how we learn. That's how we have always learned, through stories. More importantly is to remember that, to realize that the stories touch the heart, balance emotions, and engage and evoke emotions that lead to actions. Okay? There are lots of ways of doing this. I have just shown you a picture, but you can have videos, pictures, not just words, but images that support the story. Now, in patient safety, storytelling is one of the ways when we can really, through experimental learning, we can incorporate this knowledge into the formal learning environment. Storytelling is the oldest form of motivating change. And there's a lot of information, all the case studies, there's a lot of ways of telling a story. As I said, you can use videos, you can use images, but also games, personal writings, playing. There are lots of ways of building a story and affecting behavior. When the other reason why stories are so important is because when we do behavior change communications, when we're trying to impact behavior, we have to have, our impact has to go really low in this cultural iceberg image that you're looking at. If you look, you have seen this before, I'm sure, but if you see where it says values, that's what we're going to. Beliefs, assumptions, a little bit higher, attitudes. That's what we're aiming for with behavior change communications, with the communications we do in this field of pharmacovigilance. That's what we're doing. We're trying to influence behavior. And to influence behavior, we have to go deep into beliefs, perceptions, attitudes, feelings, values. And stories are a great channel. It's a great way to go exactly there, go down there, deep under the water, and really generate change. Because true, effective health communications only happens when we manage to transform knowledge into messages that can be easily understood, accepted, and acted. And I want you to remember the graphics you have seen about the communications flow and how noise can influence the way we process and decode messages. So true, effective communications only happens when these messages have been understood, accepted beyond any noise, and act, okay? And act in the direction we were expecting the audience to behave and to act. Storytelling offers us a very inexpensive and culturally appropriate, because we adapted, way of bringing health messages to many, many different audiences. And it's very cost effective. Okay, it's very engaging, it's very transforming. Now, it always surprises me why storytelling is not something that we're using in this field so much. And I think it's because health communications has to catch up with things that are being used in other areas of communication. And we are lucky in this field because we have the patient stories that, of course, can be adapted to respect privacy issues, of course. But we have patient stories, we have case studies, we have information scouting, all the narrative we receive. The ADRs, think of the ADRs and the ADRs forms. There is so much information there. And this is information that is nowadays being used by other centers like the LAREP Center in the Netherlands. They're working a lot with patient information, with patient stories to try to engage other patients or to try to influence healthcare professionals. And this is something that they're not violating any privacy norm. They're respecting the confidentiality agreement. So there are ways of doing this. But we have so much information coming from the narrative in the ADRs that we have this source of building stories. Now, everyone needs a story. Everyone in your organization needs a story to either to work with journalists, to inspire a donor to give, to motivate the staff, to spark an advocacy revolution, to change something, not to get a deal, to get a sponsorship. We always need the stories to prove what we are doing. When we have people here asking for what UMC is doing, we really work hard to show them what we're doing through stories, not just through numbers. Numbers are important. Facts are crucial because they back up, they support the stories we tell. But the stories put those numbers in context. They're basically the building blocks for reaching our goals. And they help us remember, influence, but also connect us with our sense of empathy, which we have discussed earlier these days, and generosity. Now, I talk about donors briefly, and this is just a funny cartoon that, giving is not the same for everybody. We have, it has a different impact on different people and different donor organizations. But the fact is that donors want to know what's the impact of the social impact of their donations. They really don't want to hear so much about what we do in our organization, but they want to hear about the social impact of their donations. And a great way of explaining social impact is through storytelling. And the fact is that knowing and understanding the impact is what makes donors feel that they have made a difference. Is that how they understand what's the impact of, for example, the polio eradication campaign? All those initiatives to eradicate polio are understood through stories. Let's have a look at this. Okay, as I said, there are many ways of telling a story. And here we just have a very good example about using images and a narrative that engages. Now, it's not easy collecting stories. You have to look for them. Some organizations are more used to share stories. Some organizations find it a bit more difficult. So it's really important that you start collecting them and filing them and preparing them and having them handy and deciding what you need them for and when do you need to use them. Ramesh is a Red Cross volunteer in Sri Lanka. He works with the Sri Lankan Red Cross advocating for anti-HIV/AIDS stigma. He dresses up as a Hindu god and performs in the streets with his colleagues, trying to raise awareness that we are all equal and we all deserve respect. He suffers from HIV/AIDS, and he has decided to do something about it and to address social issues that have an impact directly on his life and the life of many people who suffer this in South Asia. He is totally okay. He's very open about this, so there is no problem saying that he suffers from HIV/AIDS. And his work is part of a 5-year program. It was part of a 5-year program to fight anti-stigma in the region. And now he just keeps on doing it because he believes in it. And he does it through street performances, which is another way of storytelling. Because in the sense, storytelling is the language of emotion. I really like this quote because that's what the story is. Storytelling helps us change behavior by tapping on our emotions. And the stories are constructed that way. So they tap on our emotions to get us in that mood to learn something and to remember it, which is really important, and then change behavior. Emotional connections, those connections that last longer in life and have a more impact in the way we act, are connected through stories. So I'd like you to think of some of the stories that you remember growing up with, some of the stories that have had an impact in your behavior today as an adult. Reflect about it for a few minutes. Maybe you can discuss it, share them in a small group. Just think about what kind of stories you remember growing up with that have shaped your behavior today as an adult. So we can have a little cut now. You can have maybe a 10 minutes discussion, share those stories, and then we'll continue. Okay, I hope that was useful, just to share some of the stories. Because in the same way you have shared stories now, hopefully, and in the same way you have reflected a little bit of what stories I have heard in my life that have had an impact on who I am today. In the same way, you need to look at the stories that come from patients and find that emotional core that can turn that story into a successful behavior change tool. It's really important that when you're trying to communicate in health communications, you don't talk about numbers or statistics, but you use those stories to really have a bigger effect on a person's attitude. And also use those stories when you want to get more support, like financial support, but also leadership support within our organization. Okay? Now, when you tell a good story, the story has to be memorable. And passion is contagious, so be passionate. Have a purpose with the story. Focus on something. I'm going to show you now an example, which is very clear what the story is. Okay, I hope you enjoy that. That's very clear message, because it's very important that when you're doing storytelling is that you define your message. Okay, stories they are kind of spontaneous. You practice, you rehearse them, but you always add a personal touch depending on who the audience and what channel are you using to communicate the stories. Is it video? Is it oral? Is it graphic? How are you telling the story? Through a photograph, through a voice, through a street performance, through a song, like the song with Take and Tell. That's also storytelling. So it's very important that when you do storytelling, like with anything in communication, you start by defining the purpose and the message. That's step one for everything. Like, what do you want to achieve? Who is the audience, and who's the audience you want to reach? And what do you want to do? What's the nature of the story? What story do you need? Determine the nature of the story will help you decide who should be in the story and what kind of a story you need. So you start from the message. You start from the goal. Okay, you don't go into the stories looking what you have and then trying to adapt to your strategy to your resources. You adapt your resources to your strategy. So first you need to decide what you want to do with the story. What's the nature of the story? What's the goal? What's the message? Who's the audience? And then you go and find it. And it's not as easy as it sounds, but it is possible, it's doable, and we have seen it already happening. Don't forget that visuals are the most effective communication vehicles for evoking any kind of emotion. You need good visuals. You need a picture. You need a graphic. You need a video. You need something that tells a story. Don't forget the impact of sound as well. Mm-hmm. Remember that we are, as people, hardwired for narrative. We move from data to stories. We need the stories to motivate people to make good decisions. We need to be passionate about our message. And it's very important that you feel, that you make that connection with the audience so they kind of feel the way you want them to feel. Okay, you need to create that move. And when I'm talking about audience, I don't only mean a group of people. It can be when you're talking to your boss, to your colleague, to your children at home. Okay, it's like you use storytelling to put people in the right mood so they remember the knowledge communicated through the story and therefore act accordingly. You see what I mean? I hope you do. Otherwise, you'll have to ask me. All the information in this presentation, and as in all my presentations, is backed up by research. So I'm not a neuroscientist, but some neuroscientists have studied this topic a lot, and there is very interesting research out there available. This is just a short list for you to investigate if you want to know more about it. It's one of my favorite topics in communication, so I do read a lot about storytelling. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and you find it useful, and please, as always, just feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you, and bye.